Where? Could you please clarify?
The occupation has begun, and with it, the gates of freedom for Crimea are opening. Missiles are flying, the Russian air defense is out of action, explosions, fires, panic, occupiers are packing their bags. The Kremlin is losing the peninsula, the empire is cracking. The energy front is open, drones are hitting oil refineries and power grids in the heart of Russia. Winter is coming, with no light or heat, even in Moscow. I'll tell you all the details in just a moment. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events. A night storm over Crimea. The Ukrainian Armed Forces put on a fiery show for the occupiers. The peninsula is trembling. Deoccupation is already at the doorstep. The first birds of good news appeared in the sky around 1 in the morning. At 2, Havardiska lit up with flashes. Russian air defense was firing into the sky as if it were the last time. And just 15 minutes later, 2 missiles over Feodosia. The flight possibly of these missiles or of fighter jets was heard in the Simferopol district a bit later. The second act was fiery. Around 3 in the morning, 4 direct hits were reported from Havardiska. Over the settlement, columns of smoke, there was a strike on the airfield or the oil depot. The fire could be seen for kilometers. In Simferopol, the Hrest district was ablaze, and later photos and videos of the fire at the Krimneftezbit oil depot in Bitium Noe arrived. At 6:01, a powerful explosion sounded over Crimea, which was heard from Simferopol to the southern coast of Crimea. By the way, the Russian Ministry of Lies claims that 7 drones were allegedly shot down over Crimea during the night. We know about 2 of them. One was shot down near the oil depot in Simferopol, the other, something flammable, in Vardiska. And where are the other 5? Crimea is on the verge of liberation. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are making the peninsula uninhabitable for the occupiers, step by step. Russian settlers no longer care about the beaches. Even diesel fuel has disappeared from gas stations. And the enemy's military radars are being turned into scrap metal one after another. Ukrainian strikes are precise, systematic, and are bringing the decisive moment closer. The return of Crimea to Ukraine.
After a long, difficult and incredibly exhausting journey filled with many challenges and hardships, Crimea and Sevastopol are finally returning to their beloved home harbor. And
that harbor is Ukraine. Crimea is being cut off from the Russian Federation, and the collapse of the Crimean bridge is just a matter of time, according to Western publications. There is already a total fuel crisis on the peninsula. Some areas have been left without electricity. There isn't enough air defense even for the most important sites, and those that remain in the chaos are now shooting down their own planes.
We note that as a strategically important military base, Crimea is gradually becoming more and more inconvenient and problematic for Russia, primarily because there is no reliable source of water available there.
So the last few days have marked a new reality of life on the peninsula. The key event was a series of strikes in the area of Vardiska, where after precise hits, the largest oil depot in this area. According to locals, the burning depot in Vardiska could be seen from the suburbs of Simferopol, with the glow visible for many kilometers. In
Vardiska, there was not only a strike on the oil depot, but also on the military airfield, as well as on the Russian garrison located there.
According to information online, an ammunition depot on the garrison's territory was also hit. In addition, the oil depot near Feodosia has also partially ceased operations. Due to several attacks just this month, 11 fuel storage tanks have been completely destroyed, as confirmed by satellite images.
What is so important about the story with the Feodosia oil depot? The important thing is that it didn't just burn down by itself, it burned down with the fuel that was stored in those tanks. And that will be very difficult to restore. It's unclear what exactly was there, diesel fuel or gasoline. But if it was gasoline, which is most likely, it means that the crisis this week in occupied Crimea will be much worse than it was the week before. So we wait.
At the same time, each such strike is notable for the fact that it's almost impossible to extinguish the fire. Experts say that the burning fuel spreads across the facility, igniting neighboring tanks. And so the fire can go on for days.
The landscapes of Feodosia adorn almost the entire eastern part of Crimea. They say the flames can be seen from 30 and in some places even 50 kilometers away. Everything they say is burning to the ground. The facility needs to be shut down. This is a recommendation for the occupying Crimean authorities, who have also confirmed that there will be no gasoline.
There will be no diesel either, local authorities add. Since the beginning of the week, diesel fuel has also disappeared in Crimea, local activists report. Under these circumstances, the promise of the head of the occupying Crimean administration, Sergei Aksyonov, to stabilize the fuel supply situation is simply impossible to fulfill, added ZEED propagandist Alexander Sergeyev. At the same time, the authorities are desperately trying to conceal the real situation of what is happening in Crimea. Thus, just over the past weekend, police officers drew up at least 4 administrative reports against residents of the peninsula for posts on social media. People in particular were outraged by the lack of fuel. Interestingly, Russians themselves are partly helping the Ukrainian Armed Forces to identify targets in Crimea. Experts have analyzed that now these targets can be found simply by opening maps on the internet.
Remember when Yandex.Maps started blurring all sorts of strategic sites? I said that now it's clear exactly where to strike. Well, my friends from Informnopom noticed that the Special Operations Forces did just that. The territory of the oil depot in Kvarteyskoye was blurred on Yandex, but for some reason, that didn't help against the strikes. Mysterious. Once again, thanks to all the Russian decisions that help increase the effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes, blurring military sites on Yandex.Maps is definitely one of them.
Another decision that contributes to the regular strikes in Crimea is the work of the defense forces targeting Russian air defense sites on the peninsula. For example, the day before, the main intelligence directorate managed to strike the occupiers' newest radar system. We're talking about the Valday complex, which was developed to detect small drones.
The security service of Ukraine continues to systematically reduce the enemy's military, logistical and economic capabilities to do anything both in occupied Crimea, in other occupied territories, and even on Russian territory itself. But Crimea suffers the most because the air defense system there was deliberately destroyed. Their ability to defend themselves was reduced, and now we are working as if inside the body.
By the way, so that the occupiers in Crimea don't get the impression that everything will go back to normal, along with oil depots and military equipment, the Ukrainian Armed Forces have not forgotten about the equipment that supplies electricity to Russian bases. In several regions of the peninsula, Ukrainian defenders organized blackouts.
Several electrical substations in Crimea were disabled overnight. In particular, the main power substation in Jankoy, or Jankong, as we used to call it in Crimea, was affected. So now rolling power outage schedules are being implemented. And here, once again, Putin is being shown in very concrete terms that if he continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the occupiers in Crimea will be left without electricity and fuel.
And now, the cherry on top. During one of the latest attacks, Russian air defense crews got so nervous that they started firing at everything in sight. As a result, one less Russian fighter jet worth about $50 million.
During a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, Russian forces shot down their own Su-30SM aircraft. This happened near the Vardiske airfield.
At the same time, there's no good news for the occupiers when it comes to air defense. Analysts note that recently there have been more strikes on Russian territory itself, prompting a decision to partially redeploy air defense systems from Crimea back to Russia for protection.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Last night, the friendly drones also ventured deep into Russia. Volgograd is on fire. At the Lukoil Volgograd oil refinery, a massive fire broke out. The night sky was painted in apocalyptic colors. The Kostroma GRES came under attack. According to the investigative committee, one of the largest power plants in Russia was hit directly. Reports are coming in about explosions and fires. Just think about that for a moment. A facility that supplies half of the central region of Russia has been paralyzed. Now Russia's defense factories are left without power.
There, the third one is appearing. That's it. By the way, where is the grocery section? I think so, yes. At first, one hit a pipe, the one that's now closed. Then where are all the pipes anyway? In fact, there should be some there.
Russia is plunging into darkness. The armed forces of Ukraine have opened an energy front. Thermal power plants, oil depots, infrastructure, everything is turning into fiery chaos. The strikes are getting deeper, stronger, and more precise. If the Kremlin doesn't come to its senses, winter will become an icy.
For many Russians, the current situation has become a true nightmare, casting a heavy shadow over their daily lives and filling them with anxiety and uncertainty about what the future may bring. The constant stress and fear have deeply affected their emotional well-being, making it difficult to find comfort or hope in these troubling times. Long-range strikes.
One of the main goals is to force Russia to end the war. To make the cost of this war higher for Russia, so there is more motivation to end it.
At the same time, the defense forces are giving Russians more motivation every day. In the past few weeks, not a single night has passed in Russia without something exploding, catching fire, or being destroyed. We've gathered the most high-profile incidents. Undoubtedly, the most striking event regarding Russian blackouts was the Ukrainian Armed Forces attack on the Moscow region on the night of November 1st. Monitoring channels reported hundreds of drones that flew out to bomb Russia, and they hit their targets. Even though Moscow's power grid held up, entire settlements around the capital were left without electricity. In particular, the Moscow region and the city of Zhukovsky were left in the dark.
The armed forces of Ukraine have already carried out numerous strikes on stations and substations, causing periodic blackouts of electricity and heating in many cities across Russia and in the occupied territories. Let me remind you, Ukraine is conducting a campaign against Russian energy infrastructure in response to Russia's terror attacks on Ukraine's power-generating facilities. I believe that in December this retaliatory campaign will reach a new level, with the use of Flamingo missiles almost on a daily basis.
The campaign to destroy Russia's oil industry is also ongoing. In particular, the recent strikes on the Russian oil terminal in Tuapse were especially effective.
The attack on the Tuapse seaport was quite large-scale, effective, and also spectacular. Local residents began taking photos and recording videos of the attack. The beginning of this attack was also captured on video, and as usual, the local emergency services issued a statement asking people not to film the aftermath of the strikes. It helps the enemy.
However, what actually helps the Ukrainian armed forces is not the videos made by concerned Russians who, in the fourth year of the war, have suddenly realized that it's happening right outside their windows, but rather intelligence data, including from the West, which enables such precise strikes.
As a result of the strike, according to the Russian side's own assessment, Ukrainian UAVs hit, respectively, such targets as the central overpass, which is the main hub, at the oil pumping station, and accordingly, we are talking about a strike on an oil tanker, which at the moment of the attack was being loaded.
At the same time, when possible, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to kill several birds with one stone with a single strike. That is, on the one hand, they destroy an enterprise that is extremely important to the Russian economy, and on the other, they hit openly military targets.
A strike was carried out on the industrial giant of the Simferopol region, the Stavrolen petrochemical plant in the city of Budyonnovsk. This is one of the largest producers of polyethylene, polypropylene, benzene and other petrochemical components, which are actively used in the military-industrial complex.
Analysts note that this was the first time a strike was carried out there. By the way, the plant is located 700 kilometers from Ukraine, and the enterprise supplies raw materials both to the domestic market and for export deliveries. This means that this attack damages not only the military-industrial complex, but also Russia's export revenues. Defense forces are also targeting Russian facilities in the occupied territories. A few days ago, the residents of Crimea felt this especially strongly after one of the largest attacks on the peninsula in recent months, particularly targeting oil depots in Feodosia and Sevastopol.
The outcome of this episode is as follows. In just 1 hour, 2 major oil facilities in Crimea were put out of operation. This means a complete loss of stable resupply for the occupiers in this sector. especially against the backdrop of the destruction and disabling of the largest oil terminal in Feodosia and the general gasoline shortage in Russia itself, which, I remind you, is the only source of resupplying Crimea's oil depots.
Most recently, on the night of November 4th, drones and Storm Shadow missiles launched by the defense forces managed to damage both Russian energy infrastructure and oil depots, and also significantly complicated their presence in the occupied territories by effectively disabling all military facilities in the affected area.
Ukrainian drones struck substations in Luhansk, Alchevsk, Hadivka, and Pervomaisk. These are temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk region. There have been reports of widespread power outages for consumers, blockade on the territory of the Russian Federation over the past day. Drone strikes by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, Kursk region. This is Zheleznogorsk. The city is completely without power due to the substation. Lipetsk region. This is the Pesis traction substation. Usman, and accordingly, the city of Orel. A strike was carried out on the Oral textile facility. That's what concerns the blackout.
As for military targets, analysts call one of the most successful long-range attacks by the Ukrainian Armed Forces the explosions at the dam near Belgorod. The strike was so precise that no civilians were harmed. However, Russian units in the Kharkiv region were cut off from their forces due to the flooding, and the offensive failed.
An important objective is to strike at Russia's logistical capabilities, ammunition depots, airfields, aircraft, and troop concentrations in order to create difficulties for Moscow's war machine. The goal is to hit the centers from which Russia directs operations at the front and from where it can attack Ukraine's strategic infrastructure, including its energy sector.
At the same time, it's far too early for Russians to relax, as announced by the head of the drone systems forces, Madyar. This winter, Russian citizens will find out what a blackout is. He also reminded that gas and oil burn very well, clearly hinting at new attacks on oil refineries.
As of November, according to estimates from the Russian side itself, about 40% of oil refineries on the territory of the Russian Federation have already been put out of operation.
Well, as the saying goes, to be continued. And what do you think about the work of Ukrainian iron birds in Russia? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come. Stay tuned for the main updates and don't forget to like. Wishing you peaceful skies above!